For this week in Movie Club, we watched Black Mirror Be Right Back as part of our monthly theme, Artificial Intelligence, so let's chat about it. Even before any element of AI is introduced in the story, the characters are already discussing the idea of reality. For instance, the woman at the wake telling Martha how none of this feels real, even though it is painfully real. And before that, Ash tells Martha a story about a photograph and how his smile wasn't real in it. At the time, his family was grieving, and Martha points out that Ash's mother wouldn't have known that his smile wasn't real at the time. Ash wonders if that makes it worse or better. All of this sets the stage for the story's central question: does reality even matter when it comes to our emotional experiences? Now, there's plenty to discuss about this episode on its own, but I think it's really fascinating to compare it with last week's movie, Her, because both stories are about a human being trying to have a relationship with an AI. The point of each story ends up being pretty distinct and separate, but I can't help holding them up next to each other, especially because they both came out in 2013. Something about that year, maybe there was some news articles around that time that detail the future of generative AI, maybe it was the initial wave of early but basic chatbots. I don't know, but something obviously inspired multiple storytellers at the same time. In Her, the AI, Samantha, seems to learn from her experiences, but in Be Right Back, Ash seems to primarily learn from data intake, and it was really eerie to watch this now in 2025, when we know that's closer to how AI actually works. This idea that they can just feed the digital record of someone's life into some kind of algorithm and it churns out an imitation of them, that's not even a possibility of the future anymore, that's happening now. So even though the technology that is depicted by the end is further off, that element was spot on. So between these two stories we have Theodore and Martha. Theodore's motivation to interact with Samantha is essentially loneliness. Martha's motivation is grief. It's a fresh, raw, desperate kind of grief. But what I actually think is most interesting between the two is noting how each is willing to suspend their disbelief. In both stories, we see the characters wanting to believe that their relationships with the AI are real. But when it comes down to it, they both really struggle with the concept. I don't think either of them are ever able to fully embrace it, despite how much they would like to. In Her, a lot of it for Theodore is the physicality that he ends up having a hard time with, that Samantha isn't actually present, and when they try and pretend she is, the illusion falls apart for him. He also ends up not being able to truly wrap his head around her digital abilities, that she can be having thousands of conversations at once. Martha is actually able to push past similar concerns, but can't look past the little hints she gets that clue her into the fact that this isn't really her husband. Now, obviously, we need to acknowledge that the forms these AI take in each story are pretty different. Samantha is a new identity and remains a disembodied entity, while Ash is a replica of a real person and ends up having a physical presence. But I find it so interesting that even with all the differences in the tone and circumstances of these two stories, the storytellers were never able to conceive of a way in which the human character could fully embrace the AI as another person. In some shape or form, they struggled with that on a deep internal level. It was definitely more evident for Martha, but even Theodore, who was pretty willing to buy into the idea, ended up imploding the relationship because of those issues. A unique element to Martha's story, as I mentioned before, is that her AI is trying to imitate her husband, who is no longer there. In the moments where the replica was convincing, Martha was pretty willing to ignore the weirder aspects. For instance, when they take a walk in the country and the AI has enough data to infer the kinds of things Ash would be saying in that moment, Martha really starts warming up to him. Then he does a weird thing where he recites some data to her and she asks, "Did you just look that up?" The AI asks her if it shouldn't do that, and she goes back and forth. She knows it breaks the illusion that her husband is there, but she isn't entirely sure yet if she wants to believe the illusion or not. She's torn. And that brings us back to that central question: does reality matter when it comes to our emotions? In reality, Martha knows her husband is gone and this thing is not him. But her grief is so strong that even having a semblance of his presence back soothes that pain. It changes her emotional experience so it becomes a kind of tug of war between her logical reality and what she's feeling. There was one thing that I thought was really interesting about AI Ash. There were times where he was a pretty convincing replica of the real Ash, especially because he ends up having a body and everything, but it was only when he had enough informational data to know how to act. In normal moments, the AI would employ Ash's quick-witted, friendly attitude in a way that felt very human. But when the AI was put into situations it had no data for, it suddenly became bizarre and uncanny. The big example would be when Martha and the AI get physically intimate, and he even mentions something like, "I have no data indicating how Ash would behave in this situation." He has to pull from other internet information to know what to do, but it's devoid of Ash's personality. But there were other moments that were just as notable. For instance, when Martha was in severe emotional distress. The fact that the AI didn't know how to react to that and couldn't manufacture Ash's own emotional duress in return was really the last straw for Martha. In moments where she knew, for better or worse, that the real Ash would have been engaging emotionally and the AI was just a blank face, it was devastating for her. And that adds another spin to our central question. At first, it would seem reality isn't important when it comes to our emotions. Martha is willing to set aside her initial reluctance to indulge in this false reality, just to soothe her grief. But here we see where that road ends. If the emotional reaction isn't based in reality, then the emotions end up not feeling real either. Martha would have rather had the real Ash there, even if it resulted in negative emotions such as a fight. The reality of the situation turned out to be an integral part to her forming real emotions. And then we get the ending, where Martha is still so clearly torn by this idea. She's now keeping the Ash replica in the attic, letting her daughter interact with it on special occasions. This might seem odd until we remember the scene at the beginning of the episode when Ash was talking about his mother and how she dealt with her grief. After losing someone, the mother would take all of their photographs and store them in the attic. She wouldn't throw them out, but they weren't there for her to look at every day. She could forget about the reality of their absence, but also choose to remember them if she wished. And now Martha is handling her grief the same way. It's also a very clear statement on the notion that an AI could replace a human being. To me, this story is saying that at best, it would be like a photograph. A photo isn't the real thing. You can look at a photo and feel happy or sad as you remember the person, but you can't form a relationship with a photo. And for Martha, AI Ash is the same way. All the data in the world is never going to be able to recreate the reality of who her husband was, so this thing is no better than a picture of him. But that's just my interpretation. I would love to hear your thoughts as always, so let's discuss it in the comments. Before we wrap up though, let's take a quick look at next week's movie, Ex Machina. Funny enough, you'll be getting a double dose of Donald Gleason as he plays Caleb in Ex Machina. Caleb works at a tech company and gets the opportunity to test the latest innovative breakthrough from the company's CEO. And because of the theme of the month, I'm sure you can guess what kind of breakthrough that is. Ex Machina definitely deals with similar questions that have been raised by our previous movies, but I think there's a significant difference. With Her and Be Right Back in particular, we spent a lot of time questioning whether or not an artificial intelligence could be a real intelligence. But in this story, I think the question goes a step further. In the last movie of the month, we'll finally start to entertain questions that come after we've accepted that the technology has gained self-awareness. What if we really do create something that is smarter than us? And I don't just mean its ability to analyze and compound data. I mean something that's just as emotionally intelligent as it is intellectually. And here's some other questions to keep in mind while you watch. Do you think it would ever be possible for an artificial intelligence to gain sentience? If an AI did gain sentience, would it deserve the same treatment as a living person, or would you still consider it a machine? What would you have done if you were in Caleb's shoes? How do you think the test would go if you were interacting with an AI like Ava? I'll see you back here next week, and if you want Movie Club breakdowns sent directly to you, you can find more info in my bio.